A very good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to our webinar on listening the experiences of the impact of patient involvement in the ATMP clinical trial design. My name is Piret Fischer. I'm coming from Fraunhofer ISI, and I will moderate the first half of this webinar. So people are still coming in. We can wait a couple of, maybe 1 minute more. So let's start then. The ones who joined during the last minutes. My name is Piret Fischer. I'm from Fraunhofer ISI, and I welcome you at our webinar today on the listening the experiences and the impact of patient involvement in the ATMP clinical trial design. So next slide, please. So before we begin today, there are few quick notes that are important. So first of all, the session is recorded and all your microphones are muted, but you have the opportunity to use the chat to introduce yourselves and ask the questions anytime. And at the end of the webinar, we have a questions and answers session at the end. So you have the opportunity then to get answers to your questions. If you have technical issues, the best way to get connected is or reconnected is just to refresh the rejoining. Then your input really matters, and we are very curious about your insights. So therefore, we have set up the Mentimeter for today. And this is basically, there are two ways. Either you use the link and the code that will be shared with you shortly, or the QR code. So next slide, please. The agenda today. First, we have a short introduction, and my colleague Franca from Charité will give you an overview of the work we've done on this topic in the Join4ATMP project. Then we have 3 presentations that give a researcher's perspective on this topic, followed by 2 presentations from the industry, and last but not least, also the patient perspective will be brought to you. And we will end the webinar with a questions and answers session and with some closing remarks. Then the next slide. As I said, we've set up a Mentimeter. And if you would now all take out your mobile phones and scan the QR code, it will direct you to the Mentimeter website, where we are basically asking, or where we want to know, what are the first words that come to your mind when we think about, or when you think about patient involvement in the ATMP clinical trials. So you all have an opportunity to give your feedback, and we will see the results on this screen all together. So the words that are coming as inclusive collaboration, that it's an important input, exactly, awareness, co-creation, also transparency. And the hope seems to be the word that is most dominant, awareness. Okay, let's wait 1 more minute. Looks like the ones who want to respond have responded. So what we see from the group today, when we talk about patient involvement, the key words that are really the most prominent ones are the collaboration. So between the developers and the patients, the awareness, hope, and co-creation. And I think it's a very beautiful message to keep in mind when we proceed now with our next presentations. So I guess we can slowly move on. So today the webinar, what do we aim to achieve from the Join4ATMP side is really to hear the first-hand experience from different stakeholder groups, understand what is the impact. So we want to explore the perspectives from both sides, patients and developers, discover what works, what doesn't work, what are the practical lessons, challenges, good practices that people have come across with. And of course, all the information that we get from you from the discussions and presentations today helps us to shape the recommendations that the Join4ATMP project is supposed to deliver. And of course, to collaborate, connect, and exchange. Very good. Thank you, Claudia. Next slide, please. And now, as I said, I would like to give the screen over to my colleague, Claudia Fuchs from Charité. And Franca will give you an overview of the, or share with you one of the results of a survey we made within the project. And I hope it will offer some interesting insights for you. So over to you, Franca.
Thank you very much, Piré. So yes, we jump on, and I would like to give you a very brief overview of Join4ATMP in general now at the beginning, and then move on to the results of the survey. So Join4ATMP is an EU-funded project that unites all EUHA members, so all the members of the European University Hospital Alliance that you can see depicted here on the right side. And we all come together from 9 different countries. So the mission of Join4ATMP in general is very briefly to expand the ATMP access in Europe. And here we concentrate particularly on 3 main disease categories, which are, which are common diseases, rare non-cancer diseases, as well as rare cancers. And we do that by focusing on 3 main axes. This is on at first to map currently existing and potential future hurdles that prevent the rapid and streamlined ATMP development and clinical translation. That is second, to chart solution proposed in real-world use cases from ATMP developers and regulators. And then based on that, to design concrete recommendations with guidance for regulatory, economics, and policymaking advisors on how to overcome these hurdles. So our work package structure is depicted here. So we have 5 work packages all together that range through the whole life cycle of ATMP development. And this webinar today is part of work package 5 of stakeholder awareness. And I also would like to acknowledge, next to Claudia, Rett, and me that have an active contribution in this webinar, also want to acknowledge Maya and Marcus, who also were hardly working on organizing this webinar. So now I move on to the survey. So as our joint group, we develop altogether 340 questions for different stakeholder groups that are developers, regulators, patient representatives, payers, and others. Of course, everything was in compliance with GDPR, and we made targeted invites via the RedCap software, so the software where the survey was run, and also made direct email outreach as well as advertising on social media and on conferences. So altogether, we reached 220. Sorry, it's not going on. Let's wait a second. So it's not moving, the slide. Claudia, I try again. Okay, now we have it, hopefully.
Claudia, or I can move on for you. I think it's a problem if you're moving. I can move on for you and just say.
Okay, let's try that. Yeah, I'm sorry. Worked before, but now again. So please move on to the next slide. So altogether, we reached 220 participants that we could count, or so they gave valuable answer to our survey. Next, please. Yes, so here you see a general demographic overview of our survey. So we have these 220 respondents from more than 21 countries, and mostly represented from Italy, Germany, Spain, Sweden, and the Netherlands. We also reached some representatives from Eastern Europe and also some global players. Next, please. So regarding the representation of institutions, we have academic institutes as the most representative entities. Also hospitals were highly represented, but also industry or company perspective and patient representative perspective we have displayed in our survey. Next, please. So our first more specific question was on the ATMP awareness. So we asked the participants how they would rate the public awareness of different aspects of ATMPs. So you can see them here, so ranging from affordability, safety, long-term effectiveness, efficacy, lack of information, long-term risk and availability and access. And the lighter the color, the lower the awareness is. So next, please, we can summarize that overall the awareness of ATMPs is unfortunately still relatively low, with efficacy being the most recognized aspect. Next, please. So the next question went towards the stages at which ATMP developers involved patient representatives first. We got overall a response to this question by 57% of patients. And when we move on now, we see the results of the responses. So here you see the life cycle or the different stages of ATMP development, ranging from discovery phase until marketing authorization. And we clearly see that mostly patient representatives were involved in clinical trial design and clinical trial application. So when we go on, we see or we ask if probably an earlier engagement of patient representatives would have been helpful, and at which stage this would have been helpful. And please, one more. Then we see that we have yes, the answers shift towards more the early stages of the ATMP development process. So we can summarize when you click further that the involvement of patient representatives occurs mainly during clinical trial design. And next. Claudia, yes. Next, the earlier involvement of patient representatives is considered beneficial. You can go on to the next slide. So next, in the next question, we ask developers if in which activities patient or patient representatives were involved. So we see that the yes responses you see here in yellow are quite low here again, so indicating a general quite low involvement of patient or patient representatives at the different activities. And when we go on, we see that we ask the same question to patient representatives. So if they or the community has been involved in activities regarding ATMP development, and here we see that the yes responses are much higher, so indicating a higher engagement from their side, or at least they believe in that. And when we summarize that, we can say that developer involvement of patient representatives remains limited and is highest during the clinical development part. And regarding the patient representatives, they report a regular involvement in ATMP development, particularly also during the clinical phase. When we move on to the next part of our presentations, we went on to more specific tasks in which patients were involved in the development process. You see here also the different predefined answers, and we can summarize if we go on, that patient involvement focuses mainly on shaping clinical relevance, supporting education, and contributing to clinical trial design and communication. With the next graph, we depict here that we also ask for the value of involving patient representatives. So the higher the number, the higher the value that all the participants see, and we can clearly see and summarize from that patient involvement is highly valued, with nearly 2/3 of respondents assigning the highest scores of 5 to 6. So in the last slide of my presentation, we move on to constraints or barriers for patient involvement. And here we we had also some predefined answers ranging from lack of knowledge, time constraints, no option to get involved, lack of compensation, that were all quite often chosen as an answer, and we can summarize from that. If we move on, that key constraints to patient involvement include limited knowledge and time, as well as lack of participation opportunities. And in the last bar I would like to present you is we ask the question, what are the current barriers that patients experience in assessing an approved ATMP for their condition? Here, this is a bit more busy graph, but we see in the first 3 bars, so the main parts are that ATMPs are not or are being delayed in being commercialized in the home countries, that ATMPs are not reimbursed in the home countries and due to financial constraints, but also the other ones, the other answers, that there are no local treatment centers or that there are informations missing for cross-border treatments are also important part. And we can summarize that access to ATMPs is limited by commercialization delays, by reimbursement gaps, as well as financial constraints. So with this, I'm at the end of my presentation. You can move one further. Exactly. Thank you very much. All our results will also be published. So please stay tuned. And I hope this gave you a general insight what European stakeholders think about patient engagement and how they do it. And I'm now very much looking forward also to the more personal perspective of our invited experts. And I give back to Pire.
Thank you very much, Franca, for sharing the results of Join4ATMP. We move on to our external speakers now, and we start with a researcher's perspective. So I am very happy to introduce you our first speaker today, Dr. Julio Delgado. Julio is a hematologist and the head of the oncoimmunotherapy unit at the University Clinic of Barcelona. So Julio, the stage is yours.
Okay, well, I hope you can hear me well. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation to all the organizers and particularly to Claudia. And let me just say, I'm not going to use any slides, so I hope this go quicker. My institution has been developing ATMP products for actually more than a decade. But the first clinical trial actually started 9 years ago. So in my opinion, we academic researchers are very well equipped to understand and incorporate the patient's views into clinical research. And the reasons are obvious, is because we are physicians ourselves. So until very recently, because I've stopped having my own clinic, I was seeing patients every Monday. So it was easy for me to ask them directly, how do you feel about this treatment? How do you feel about receiving this therapy? What are your needs? What is your what do you expect from the treatment? So in contrast to perhaps industrial developers, we, I believe, are closer to the patients. At the same time, we have to acknowledge our limitations. The first one is that it is not 100% true that patients share with physicians their preferences, their needs, their beliefs. And we need to acknowledge that. They are frequently intimidated by us. They are sometimes afraid of saying the truth in case, this could be a problem in case they are actually truthful to us. So sometimes they actually forget. They're so intimidated and afraid they don't. But they confide in our nurses. And I'd like to put that into value here. I have to say that nurse practitioners, as they are called in other countries, or advanced practice nurses, are absolutely essential to our program and many programs out there, because normally patients truly tell nurses how they feel. So for me as a physician, what is very important is to talk to my nurses and the patients, but also to the nurses, because it is usually the nurses who tell you the truth. Well, the patient was putting a brave face during the clinic visit, but he's worried, he's not as happy as it looks like, etc., etc. So I think this is very important as well, to incorporate nurses here if we want to have the actual information that we need. And the other thing that I like to say is that we have not been very good at incorporating patients' views in the past. I confess that we had this paternalistic approach to medicine where we thought we knew better. But fortunately, this has changed, or it must change in cases where it has not changed. So I think we are doing better and better in this regard. We have incorporated patients' views not only in giving us advice on what is the best quality of life questionnaire or even the clinical trial design, but even in the evaluation of the results. So for instance, we are setting up an EU project called CARTEL-EU, and this is a multinational project, and there are patient representatives in the steering committee. So they are part of actually every decision we make in that clinical trial, not just designing the study, but actually evaluating it. And of course, there's a very important role of patients in health technology assessment. We should not forget that very important piece of information. And finally, there's one thing I'd like to say, and is that I think there's still a lot more to do, particularly when we talk about regulation. So, you know, EMA has been very active in incorporating patients' views for a number of years. You go to the EMA, you see there are patient representatives at the CAT, there are patient representatives at the COMP, there will be patient representatives at the CHMP. You go to any scientific advice procedure, you find patient representatives there. But I think we need to go, and we could discuss that later, we got to go a step beyond and actually incorporating patient preferences into primary endpoints of clinical trials, etc. So things like, okay, we have this drug that perhaps is not improving very much the survival of patients, but is improving significantly the quality of life. Okay, so that drug should be approved. So these endpoints should also be incorporated into these pivotal clinical trials. And I think the EMA has been hesitant about it. Sometimes they say, yeah, because the questionnaires are not validated. You know, they like make excuses about this. And I think we should try and convince regulators and say, hey, if you think the instruments are not good enough, okay, let's work on that. Let's bring this forward. Let's find a way in which patient voice matters, but for the big decisions like this drug is approved or not, and not just to have them there at the table and listening to their opinion, which is fine, of course, but let's put the patient's values at the center of the drug approval as well. That is the message, because I'm saying this because you probably read the recent EMA guidelines on patient experience data and PROs, and I was disappointed, really. I thought, okay, I mean, the EMA should do better than what it's doing right now. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all these insights and the very interesting presentation. I think we will directly now move on to our second presentation. So this is, I'm happy to introduce you, the Professor Antonia Busse. Antonia is a professor and senior physician at the Department of Hematology, Oncology, and Tumor Immunology at Charité. So Antonia, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah, so now you can hear me, right? So thank you very much for inviting me, and for the opportunity to discuss some of our experiences. So we are developing T-cell therapies for hematological and solid malignancies, and we also translate our therapies into the clinic. And in this translational phase, we are gaining more and more experience with patient involvement. And so one key observation or the one key observation we made is that patient involvement is often formally implemented and yet not always structured in a way that allows it to unfold its full potential. So actually, I mean, you all know that patient involvement should be a standard in clinical trials, but why is it so important in these early clinical trials and in TCR or in CAR and TCR T-cell trials? You know, so you have this complex manufacturing, the uncertain timelines, a high logistical burden. We have to deal with acute but also potential long-term toxicities, which might be especially relevant in hematological neoplasms like B-cell neoplasms, multiple myeloma, for instance. But we have also to think on TCR T-cell therapies for solid cancers, which are coming more and more. And here we have quite often basket trials. So you have different tumor entities with different needs. And the primary objectives of these early phase trials, is dose finding and safety. And patient-relevant aspects such as quality of life are, if at all, only exploratory objectives. And it's clear it's largely inherent to the study design, which small and heterogeneous cohorts. But the consequence is that many study designs are medically sound, but not necessarily feasible from a patient perspective or adequately aligned with patient needs. And this is exactly where, in my opinion, structured patient involvement becomes critical. So we know it can improve the feasibility of study procedures. It supports a clear and comprehensive patient communication, it strengthens trust, and facilitate participation. It can also help to incorporate patient-relevant aspects, implementation of study procedures, for instance, or patient-relevant endpoints, even if these remain exploratory endpoints and are difficult to evaluate from a statistical perspective. But it might be relevant for design phase 2 trials or other T-cell therapy trials. So in this sense, patient involvement is not an optional add-on. It's a central quality factor in the clinical development of ATMPs. So I would like to present you 2 examples from our own IITs. And to illustrate where we see key challenges, what has worked well so far, and which structural adjustment we think have to be implemented. So the first trial is a PRIMA study. Here we investigate TCR T-cell therapy targeting MyD88 in patients with relapsed refractory B-cell lymphomas. And as a part of the funding application, formal patient involvement was implemented. But it was really only a formal patient involvement. So we wrote our application, and then we sent it to a German lymphoma patient advocacy group, and this group provided a support letter. But actually they did not give any substantial impact on the study design. So in addition, we decided to work with a local patient representative who was highly motivated and engaged, and we discussed the study concept. However, the problem was that entity-specific expertise was lacking because it was a breast cancer patient, and there were no patient representative available for that has experience in lymphoma. And the materials we provided to her were only partially accessible to her due to the complexity of this material. And another critical factor was timing, because the patient involvement occurred relatively late in our application process. So there was only very limited room for meaningful adjustment from her perspective. So as a result, this patient involvement was formally present, but had no relevant impact on the study design or the planned conduction. And the key lesson for us was that the main issue is usually not a lack of willingness to engage patient representatives, but rather a lack of structural alignment in terms of timing, appropriate expertise, and suitable formats for collaboration. In a second study, we adapted our approach, although we encountered new challenges. And this study, it's a TOMATA trial, involves a MAGE-A4 specific TCR T-cell therapy for the treatment of MAGE-A4 positive neoplasms. Here in this trial, we jointly revised our study synopsis before application together with patient representatives, and we conducted structured discussions. We asked targeted questions focusing both on understanding the therapy, the flow of the study. We also discussed concrete burden for patients, patient-relevant endpoints, and patient needs. And this should not only then be done before conducting the trial, but we will also continue this during and after participation or after conduction of the trial. And here we observed that this patient involvement had really an impact. We changed information materials. We developed specific educational materials, also questionnaires were designed to capture patient needs during each study visit. So the difference was not simply a higher degree of involvement, but rather a clear and an early and then structured and also iterative engagement. And so I have to say, we addressed some key challenges better in this second trial, especially this early involvement. Nevertheless, relevant challenges remain. And I have to say, the complexity of these cellular therapies still requires substantial effort in terms of explanation and alignment. And I guess we all need to consider this also when we plan our work packages for the trials. And in addition, in basket trials, challenges arise from the fact that we have these different tumor entities with different requirements and perspectives. And this leads to the practical question of whether and how patient representatives for each focus entity in these basket trials should be included, and whether such representatives are available at all. And I mean, this is really a structural gap in terms of solid cancers, because while patient representatives in hematological malignancies already have some experience with cell therapies, such experience is largely lacking in solid tumors in Europe, as there are currently no approved cell therapy products for these indications. So in conclusion, patient involvement is often formally implemented, yet not always structured in a way that allows to unfold its full potential. And based on our experience, we developed a framework that we now aim to implement in future trials. And the central element is the early involvement, ideally already during the concept phase. Another key aspect is appropriate matching of expertise. That means that whenever possible, both entity-specific and cell therapy experience should be considered when selecting patient representatives. And we aim to establish structured formats for collaboration based on clearly defined questions, iterative feedback processes. And another important element is ensuring understanding between scientific and patient perspectives. So complex scientific concepts needs to be communicated in an accessible way, while patient feedbacks must be structured so that it can be meaningfully integrated in the study design. And this, in my opinion, requires training on both sides, clinicians and patients. So we share our experience with other clinicians, and in parallel, experienced patient representatives support and mentor less experienced representatives, helping them to engage effectively in projects and contribute then in a structured manner. And then finally, what I think is also quite important is the documenting of the impact of patient involvement, so that we can make this involvement transparent, how patient input has influenced study development to improve it during development of further trials. So the overall goal is that with this process patient involvement is optimized. It's a reproducible, standardized process to improve the design and the feasibility and also the acceptance of clinical trials. And with this, I thank you, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards.
Thank you so much. now I think it's time to move on to the last presentation from the research perspective. So I'm happy to introduce you Professor Alessandra Renieri. She is the professor of medical genetics at the University of Siena. So please, Alessandra, go ahead.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure if Alessandra is here. I could not see her in the participants, so maybe we can just move on with the next speaker, and eventually she's joining later. Probably she had some personal commitments she couldn't that she couldn't join, but I've not heard anything, so maybe we can just go with Tara.
Exactly.
I see her appearing on the screen.
Are you here?
I am here, yes.
Very good,
Thank
excellent.
You.
So we move straight to the industry, and
amazing. And I did have
you.
a few slides that I would just walk through quickly if you're able to pull them up. And just thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me to be part of this. My name is Tara Hastings. I am a patient engagement lead here at Sanofi for rare disease and genomics medicine. My role sits within research and development, but I'm very passionate about this work. I'm a rare disease patient myself. I'm a former care partner to my mom who lived with Parkinson's disease for many years. And actually, before I joined Sanofi, I worked at the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's research for a long time. So I'm familiar with experience on the advocacy side. And I have also participated in 2 clinical trials myself. So very passionate about this work and grateful for the chance to join you. If we can move to the next slide, please. I just quickly need to say that the views and opinions that I'll express are my own and should not be attributed to my employer. And I'm going to just quickly talk about high level how we think about integrated patient engagement at Sanofi, and then share a little bit about a specific example in a type of muscular dystrophy called myotonic dystrophy type 1. So if we could go to the next slide, I'm going to breeze through these so I can get to the meat of what I'm excited to talk about. But we do have a real commitment to patients that our science is informed at every step. And we actually have a public patient charter where we commit to these important elements, and we report every year on how we do. But in particular, really proud of the fact that at the bottom, you'll see 100% of our clinical studies have been informed by patients. The next slide, please. Oh, sorry, maybe there was an animation in there. I didn't realize, sorry about that. But so we think of this concept as what we call integrated patient engagement. And really what I wanted to highlight with this slide is just that we think of this as intentional milestones built into the process, not haphazardly. Something comes up and we need input from members of the community. We try to be systematic and collect that in a number of different ways. And one piece that's so important is that bottom bullet around interacting with patient advocacy groups, in addition to patients and care partners themselves. Next slide, please. So really, I think everyone is aware of and thinks about this similarly, but having that knowledge of the patient journey and experience is really what flows into then all of the decisions that we're making. So that leads to study designs that are optimized and simplified by patients, that we're measuring what matters to patients. And even if you step back well before that, that we're moving forward therapies that actually treat the unmet needs that are most important. That then rolls down into clinical trial awareness, decision making, and all throughout is communication and collaboration with patient advocacy groups. Next slide, please. So this, I'm going to breeze through. This is just related to that patient promise charter that I had mentioned, and that we report on that every year and really try to strive to hold ourselves accountable and make sure that we are a good partner to the patient communities and really bringing in their input. Next slide. This is just a note that we actually ask our partners how we're doing and try to improve from there, but I'm going to breeze past this one too. And so next slide. And then I just wanted to talk specifically, but I am going to talk more broadly about early engagement even before you get to the point of study design. But we do, when we get to that point, what we call a pressure test of a study protocol. And just wanted to really highlight here that our community advisor feedback is given as much weight in the process as anything else. So of course, at that time, you're also seeing if clinical trial sites feel the study is operationally feasible. You're getting input from medical professionals, and really that community feedback is just as important to us and is really embedded within that process. I think that may be my last slide. Does that seem right? And so I wanted to talk specifically in my last 5 minutes about myotonic dystrophy type 1. So Sanofi has a gene therapy under investigation. It's investigational. It has not been approved by the FDA or any other regulatory agency worldwide for the uses that are under investigation. So no conclusions about safety and efficacy should be drawn. Just wanted to kind of say my legal language. But there's 3 things that I think are really important here. The first is what I think we all know and are striving towards, which is start early, well before moving into the clinic. So many years before we actually got to phase 1, we were engaging with patient advocacy groups. We had an internal patient engagement day that was attended by over 200 of our colleagues, where they were able to hear from members of the community and their care partners. We had panels where we collected insights. I think one thing that is important for everyone to be aware of is, especially for something like a phase 1 gene therapy study, we do need a recognition of what can and can't be influenced. You know, primarily that is focused on safety, and we know that that can be burdensome in terms of trial design for patients, but we only have so much latitude because safety is the priority and we need to be monitoring that. So I think there is a little bit of a balance, but we strove to make any adjustments that we could, think about how we administered some of the necessary tests. And also, even if we weren't able to make adjustments to the actual design, we could operationally think about how to make that experience better through travel support, scheduling of visits, those types of things. So that's the first piece, is early and in-depth. The second is that, and I'm sure many are on the call today, our patient advocacy group partners have amazing resources available. So listening sessions, there's a report specifically in myotonic dystrophy called the Christopher Project, which was so valuable for us in understanding unmet needs and priorities, symptom burden. So please, for those on the call, keep doing it, especially gathering that community experience information and having it available to many companies to be able to draw upon and learn from is incredible. Also, please reach out and connect with companies that are working in your space. You know, there are a lot of regulations about what we are allowed to do and what we're allowed to do reactively versus proactively. So we're always happy when great patient advocacy partners reach out to us about engagement in addition to the work that we're trying to do. And then the last piece, and one that I feel is incredibly important for our program, but I imagine for many on the call, is around education. And I'm not speaking about recruitment materials or anything like that. We know in myotonic dystrophy, this is the first potential gene therapy. That community needs to understand that science to make an informed decision about whether participation is the right thing for them or not. And it's a very complicated topic. So we held patient roundtables to understand what they did and didn't know, and sometimes misperceptions. I think people think they have an understanding, and actually it's a little bit off. That led to co-creation of FAQs around gene therapy, a video, a presentation that we've given to patient advocacy groups. So I would say we're certainly talking about actual drug development elements, even in the survey, preclinical and outcome measures, but we also need to help these communities be ready to make a decision whether that is to move forward with it or not. And these are very complicated topics. So that was a key focus for us in terms of community engagement, and has been really powerful in terms of what we've been able to create together. So there's a wonderful umbrella patient advocacy organization called EURORDIS that is located in Europe, that has a number of country groups that are part of it, Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation and Muscular Dystrophy Association in the US. We have many partners to thank for the work that we've been able to do together, and individual patient advisors. But I think those are the three things that I think are most important. Start early, have it be ongoing and in depth, really lean into relationships with patient advocacy groups that are doing wonderful work, and really think about the education that's necessary for these more complex treatments, so that we're doing right by the community and they can make the best decision for themselves. So thank you so much for including me. I'm really proud to be on this panel with Mary as well, and excited to hear her perspective.
Thank you so much, Tara. And as already said, our next speaker is Mary Wang, and she's the Patient Engagement Director at Genespire. So Mary, please go ahead.
Thank you. I thank you for this invitation to share the experience at Genespire regarding involving patient voice in our clinical trial design. So I'm the Patient Engagement Director at Genespire. Genespire we're based in Milan in Italy, and was founded in 2020 as a spin-off biotech from SRTJ, the San Rafael Teleton Institute for Gene Therapy. And we have a strong scientific heritage for gene therapy, and also patient-centered, people-centered culture from the founding institute, the Teleton Foundation in Italy. So my background is scientific, but prior to joining Genespire, I was actually working for a global rare disease patient advocacy organization, and the really keeping and having including patient perspectives in decision making is really something we've been advocating, and it's really nice for me to be in this role to actually bring this to life. And so just to mention that, yes, we've been in developing a lentiviral vector-based gene therapy for a rare metabolic condition called methylmalonic acidemia, or MMA, due to a mutation in MUT genes, and it has early onset symptoms in children. At this stage, we are planning on a phase 1 and 2 clinical trial, and so it was quite interesting to see the survey results at the beginning of this webinar, that many engagements are taking place and where we are. So this is kind of a work in progress, I have to say. Indeed, we're speaking to patient representatives as part of our planning forward for our clinical trial. So thinking about reflecting on engagement or early conversations, I think for gene therapy, because it's as an innovative nature, and also it's irreversible, and it does still carry some significant unknowns. And so adding all this together, and also for us, we are looking at very young children, so we feel there's really a responsibility to engage, to speak with the community. And it's not important, it's actually quite essential. And so for us, we decided to engage the community early, at the stage where their feedback can still influence decisions for study design, to be able to consider their input and integrate them into our study. And so also for us, it's really important to understand their disease journey, their burden, expectations, and concerns, and also what really matters in their daily life. We're also thinking of what the previous speakers were mentioning about structure. I think that is something is quite helpful in really engaging and speaking with the patient community. So MMA is it's a rare metabolic condition, and in Italy, it is actually part of newborn screening, but it has very heterogeneous presentation, and as a rare condition, families are quite dispersed geographically, and so as the first thing you want to do is to identify and reach to the right community. Who do you actually need to talk to? Who do you to have a meaningful conversation? And as a rare disease, it's not always easy to find patient organizations, and also dedicated to that rare disease, and in different geographies, and or there may be families who are not part of the established patient organizations or groups. So I feel like you do want to look more broadly, in different languages, and for us, being a pediatric population, we want to make sure we speak to, of course, then the caregivers and the parents, and incorporating also their input. So in our approach, we're speaking to our patient community in a group setting, in a panel, and this, of course, you can imagine sometimes language can be a barrier, and so making it difficult for some people to be able to engage in group discussions, but that does not mean you cannot speak with them, and so you can always, of course, talk to them in a different setting to make sure that you capture their input as well. And I think knowledge was another thing that was mentioned previously. I think that's something we also experience, and there's quite varied knowledge with regards to gene therapy, so some technical scientific knowledge, but also in terms of drug development or clinical research processes. But I don't feel these are barriers per se, and I think we do feel there's responsibility to provide information, to explain the processes, and as such, we have incorporated onboarding sessions to be able to level, for instance, the knowledge between the different members of the panel speaking with us. So I think with that, also in terms of identifying the persons to speak with, it's important to recognize diversity. And so for us, the MMA is quite heterogeneous, so you want to be able to include different profiles to have a representative group that you're speaking with in terms of the disease. And having that structure and to have a safe environment for discussion is really important. So you want to create a safe, open environment for them to ask questions freely regarding processes, regarding the science, and all questions are taken seriously and responded to. And that's part of the I think the structure that you want to have in liaising and speaking with patient representatives. And what is important for us is to be able to use their time well. You don't want to overburden them with their time. So to actually have conversations which are of mutual interest and of mutual importance. Also sharing the questions with them in advance so they have time to consider and think about what we want to speak about, and so that the conversations and what you learn can be would be meaningful. Maybe just to share one example in terms of the impact what we learned from our patient involvement experience. So MMA is a metabolic condition affecting how the body turns food into energy. And so keeping a food diary is quite important. And so this was something we were discussing with our patient representatives and community, and they were saying, you know, with that conversation, we will actually change, like, for instance, the days of diary they were thinking they may need to keep to have a better accuracy and quality of information. And so I think that's a really direct impact, you know, really coming from that conversation with the community. So with that, I'm happy to answer more questions and share our experience. But thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So I guess we take the questions and answers at the end of all the presentations. And we can now move on to our last presentation of this afternoon. So I'm happy to introduce you to Dr. Gvantsa Kvantaliani from, yes, sorry?
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for pronouncing that well. Yeah.
And Gvantsa is coming from the Rett syndrome Europe. So very happy to have you with us today. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I'm just confirming if you can see my screen. I will change to presenter's view. You can see just okay, right?
Yeah, everything is perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Gvantsa, and thank you for all the organizers bringing this discussion together. It is really important to listen, lived experience from the patients, but also from the industry side. So I'm happy to be part of this discussion as well. So before anything else, just to give you a bit of background, under the introduction, they said that I'm a doctor. That's true. I'm a physician pediatrician by training and by practice. And I had the privilege of working with rare disease patients way before my daughter was diagnosed with Rett syndrome. But as you can get now, I have a daughter 10 years old with Rett syndrome. We are based in Georgia, so in the Eastern Europe, and I was lucky enough to work or serve Rett syndrome Europe as a board member, as well as the scientific advisory board. But from another perspective, when I was working in the clinic with the patients, right, it is always hard for the physicians. We have other doctors here who will, I'm quite sure, agree with me that it is really hard to say that this is your diagnosis, right? And we don't have anything. We have your management plan. Here it is, and you go home, and we will try to schedule your following meetings, right, with us, or appointments. So it was really hard for me as well as a parent, but also as a professional. And that was a really shift for me to go to the clinical trial and drug development. And that's why I joined Parexel, which is one of the clinical research organizations. So I'm working for more than 6 years now. So I will give you a little bit everything here in this presentation, but I will focus mostly on the Rett syndrome and the example what we as a community, Rett syndrome community, we did, right? So for those who may not be familiar with Rett syndrome, it is like to imagine watching your child developing normally, smiling, learning to sit, maybe even saying a few words, And then slowly over next few months, you see it losing the abilities that they already gain. Speech disappears, the hand movements change, walking become difficult, later seizures, scoliosis, sometimes fractures, breathing problems. So it is really very complex disease. It is called neurodevelopmental disorder and needs lifelong 24/7 care. So this is reality for families, for myself, and thousands of many families around the world, right? This disease or indication is really important from the research perspective because it is caused by single gene mutation, which is MECP2 or MECP2 gene. And we knew in late 90s that we had the mouse models and we saw, not we, but research saw and professors in the lab that it is reversible, right? So it was the starting point in the late 90s that Rett syndrome might be reversible. And that was a really interesting point. But from the research perspective, there is also very challenging part of the disease because it has the mosaicism, which means that not every cell has the same level of mutation or the level of MECP2 protein, which is a product of the MECP2 gene. So it is like if you are developing ATMP or let's say the gene therapy, you really need to structure that way that every cell has the individual level of MECP2. So this is very, very hard, very challenging, which is still ongoing challenge, but hopefully I will share with you later that there are some in clinical development, some gene therapies that are really giving us hope, right? So Rett syndrome has become a strong example in discussions around advanced therapy medicinal products, so ATMPs, and there are several reasons for that. And as I mentioned, first, the disease is caused by a single gene mutation, which gives researchers a clear therapeutic target. Second is that Rett syndrome is neurodevelopmental rather than neurodegenerative. This doesn't mean that neurodegenerative diseases doesn't have the interest or industry doesn't have an interest for ATMP development, but it really gives us the idea that, and this means that restoring gene function may actually improve the neurological function even later in life. So this is an important point. And the third was that, as I said, scientific field already had this strong biological proof from preclinical models, from the mouse models that supported development of the gene-based therapies, right? So they said that it is reversible because they saw the symptom reversal in the mouse model. So many individuals lives with the epilepsy, severe motor disabilities, and significant communication problems. And this combination really gives us the huge unmet need, which is here in Europe, which is globally here, right? So, and makes Rett syndrome a compelling case for the innovative therapies. And this is the case for now. And what really changed the trajectory of Rett syndrome research was the way how the patient community organized itself. And what I want just to highlight here, I'm representing Rett syndrome Europe here, and I'm talking about Rett syndrome, but we can name so many different ultra-rare diseases where this community did so much for the research, right? They invested so much effort, money, fundraised, and making so many things to give the to push the research forwards, right? This was the case for the Rett syndrome, and I know that here we have many patient advocacy representation on this webinar, and it is really good lessons learned how Rett syndrome community did things, right? So it was mostly US-based organizations because I will talk a little bit later that it is quite hard to organize things that well in Europe because of the fragmentations and the different countries and many challenges that we have. But it is Rett Syndrome Research Trust, International Rett Syndrome Foundation, and they really took very strong strategy. And how I see it is that their approach was really very strategic, and they were directly focused on the treatment or cure options. They asked a simple question for the industry. So what would you need before investing in Rett syndrome, right? So it was from the basic research perspective as well as the later at the clinical stage. And the answer was quite clear that the industry needed strong basic science, animal models, natural history data, patient registries, and the scientific advisory infrastructure, right? So these are the step-by-step what Rett syndrome community really did. And I'm really very proud. And I would say that it is not under the Rett syndrome Rett syndrome community, which is based in US, but globally, because everyone was really contributing to this together. And this is where we are today, that we are in very unusual situation in a good way, that more than 25 companies are now working on Rett syndrome treatments. And that is dramatic change from even a decade ago. And it really reflects the broader trend in rare disease drug development, but also the specific advocacy works, which was done really globally. And now, as I see, I have shifted this discussion from let's please involve patient advocacy from the different perspective that patient advocates can do so much more than, they can really push this industry forwards. And we have many examples. It's not only for Rett syndrome. But back to the point, right? So what we have now is 2 gene therapy programs that are in advanced clinical stage. And on the pharmacological side, we have also UCB who is initiating the phase 3 trial. And in 2023, we had the first disease-specific therapy for Rett syndrome, which was approved in US by the FDA. Canada also followed shortly after. But here we are in Europe. Many families are still waiting. We don't have that many clinical trials or even the basic research happening in Europe, but hopefully we will push things forward. And what we are doing is that REDX, which is a pan-European registry, was launched last year, and we are really happy to say that we are moving forward in Europe as well, and we are promoting collaboration between the different researchers and experts in the field. REDX or the registries in the Europe really is a big challenge, and it is related to the fragmentation. And we know that patient advocacy organizations at this national level, they already have their databases, their registries, and it is really hard sometimes to convince everybody to come and join and do the same thing once again. But this is really important to say that the common data in Europe is very important for investors, for the industry, and this fragmentation is something that is quite a challenge for Europe. And when we talk about advanced therapies like gene therapies, the fragmentation costs time, right? And for patients with rare disease, time matters enormously. And this is exactly why the initiatives, the different initiatives like the REDX registry, but we have other initiatives for the collaboration of the researchers as well. And this share the infrastructure, coordinated data, right? And the collaboration across countries are what allow Europe to accelerate these clinical trials and ATMP development. Because again, we mentioned collaboration right from the beginning of this webinar, and that's so true. We need this collaboration, and I would be objective, but Rett Syndrome Europe is the organization which covers more than 40 countries which are represented in our organization. So that's all about the collaboration, right? And last but not least, I have my last important point that I want to share is that whenever we look at a successful clinical development programs, it almost always includes strong collaboration with the patient advocacy organizations, right? And patient communities being involved in the process. They are bringing the knowledge of the disease, real world insight into the daily life and deep connections with the families. But most importantly, they really bring something that no other stakeholder can bring. It is urgency. We are working 24/7 for a patient organization. This is not a project. This is not a research grant. This is not a development program, right? It is really for us, everyday life, families, and these advocates really work, we all together work constantly and often really quietly and without recognition to move the science forward and create these opportunities for the children and our communities. In my experience, from the different perspective, as I said, from the par excel or the CRO side, when we partner with the patient advocacy organizations and we are starting these collaborations, they are always very open to any discussion. So please go and ask them, give them on board, right, as early as possible, as our presenter said, right? So bring them early because they are not asking anything. They will give you so much time, effort, and you can find really a better partner in your journey than the patient advocates. And yeah, I mean, this is the most important part, right? So thank you so much, and hopefully it was interesting for the my fellow patient advocates who are hopefully here and listening.
Thank you so much, Gvantsa, for this very, very inspiring presentation and your personal story behind it, sharing it with us.
Thank you.
I now, so we move on to the question and answers session, and I'm giving over the moderation to Claudia. So Claudia, please go ahead.
Just move to the right slide and I will share my screen again. Thank you all to all the speakers for these great presentations, and we had some very interesting comments in the chat also. But before we move to the chat, I would like again to ask you to join the Mentimeter through menti.com and using this code or directly scanning the QR code, because we would like to involve also you participants to ask you some questions about patient engagement, patient involvement in ATMP clinical trial design. So the first questions we would like to ask you is, what is your experience with patient involvement in designing clinical trials for advanced therapies? And you have here a multiple choice test, which gives you a few different answers. So I've been involved as a patient representative. I actively involve patients in research or trial design. I have some experience with patient involvement. I know about it, but haven't been directly involved, and I'm interested in learning more. Let's see, the first things came up.
Claudia, the presentation is not in presentation mode.
Which is strange because I see it in presentation mode.
Okay, no.
Let me share again.
Yes, now.
Let's just wait another few seconds. It's still changing a little bit. So we have 21 of 31 responding. So guys, you can do more. I know that you can do more. But I think it's already a quite interesting outline here. So especially if we look in the dark red and in the lila color, so more than 50% say that they know about it but haven't been directly involved, and they are interested also to learn more about it. So I think we see here quite a tendency, what especially we working in the rare disease field see very often. So everyone is speaking about patient engagement, how to do patient involvement, but really practically it's always a little bit difficult, let's say, to do it. But let's just discuss later. So maybe let's move to the next Menti question. Where do you think patient perspectives can make the biggest difference in trials for ATMPs? I see here only a few responses. Not sure if people is not able to reconnect, so please reconnect to menti.com and use the same code or scan the QR code you see here on the left. I'm not sure whether it's not working anymore or if someone has problems to respond, but it doesn't seem. Let me just see. So I think the problem was mainly that it's some kind of way not uploaded the current registration. But I think we see here some very interesting outcomes also. You see the number of dots, or the number of dots in patients are very relevant in defining relevant clinical endpoints, improving trial feasibility, recruitment and retention, patient burden and visit. I think almost all of them, except for the risk-benefit assessment, are almost, let's say, the same number of influences. And I would like here now, before we move on to the next slide, ask a question to our speakers, to our panelists. We have heard a lot of very interesting presentation on how important is it to involve patients early from the beginning, already from the research design, before the phase 1 clinical trial, especially in ATMPs. And we have heard some very interesting perspectives from the industry, from Tara and from Mary, how they did this. But I would love to take over a little bit more this discussion, because we all know when we speak about patient involvement, it should be done very early, but it's most then and very often done really in the clinical trial phase. So only patient involvement is often really associated with clinical trial design, as we mentioned here, defining relevant endpoints. And what I would like to ask you, how early should patients be involved? And what does early enough mean in practical terms? And we have already heard a few examples, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So please feel free to speak out.
Sure. So I could start with initial thought. I think, and I'd be curious, but I guess Mary likely agrees. One of the things that I think can be really challenging for companies that are early in the space, and many of us on the call know, is that not all therapies move forward, even out of that preclinical phase, into the clinic. And that's very difficult. It's candidly, very difficult for us who get all invested in working on that. But I know, especially for patient communities where there may be no real treatments, like my own rare disease, effective treatments, that's very difficult. And so I think a lot of us are always trying to walk the line of being respectful, bringing in that input, but also setting expectations. And when communities rightly are waiting and eager, that's not always the easiest thing to do. So I think on the industry side and even, on the researcher side, it's important to be really transparent and really clear about what's happening. I do think there's also a role for patient advocacy groups to play in that the more your community is educated around the process for developing therapeutics, the more they have the context to understand some of that risk and the line that we're trying to walk. Because the last thing we ever want to do is disappoint communities, but also you don't want to not engage, because that's not the correct approach. So usually we'll try to do some of our own level setting. But I also think the more that we can strive to educate communities about the process for therapeutic development can help with some of that early tension, because theoretically, as early as possible, we know is best. But I do think it's easy to say and maybe a little bit more complex in practice.
Mary, you would like to add something?
Yeah, sure. No, I agree. Indeed, we come to a place when we started to speak about a therapy development, then we are mindful of expectations and their practicalities and such. But I don't feel per se, my broad experience, that patients are not being involved, or they're not wanting to be involved in the whole development phase, even the preclinical pre-translational basic research space. So I think perhaps when we're speaking about ATMP, then there's that jump then when it becomes actually therapy development, because previously in early stage, you might have different treatment options, different targets, different approaches. But when you start to go in further direction, then yes, I agree. We are mindful of that, but we do want to capture them, having their involvement in these conversations early enough so that they make a difference.
Thanks, Mary. And here, Gvantsa, the question to you: what do you think could patient organizations do to help, let's say, their participants or their families to manage this expectation? As Mary and Tara mentioned, they might have expectations. Is there something we can do from a patient organization point of view to help them to expect
and I
this?
think that we already do, right? So we are making these educational webinars, and there are many patient advocacy groups that are doing the same, right? So one of the things that patient advocates are doing is sharing the knowledge, and the knowledge in the ATMP development. What does it mean when we are using the word cure? What does it in reality means, right? So not to have the unrealistic expectations. And I would say that in the patient organizations and the different patient advocacy groups, you will see people who don't have any medical knowledge, but they are so much better than many physicians in their disease, right? So this is the point that we need to highlight, and absolutely we need to do better. We can make it better, but just imagine that, as I said, we are working 24/7. We have our full-time jobs, right? And in parallel, we are trying to get in touch with our community and really bring that knowledge, what we have, in a different manner that they can understand and have the realistic expectations. And just a quick note from the previous question, we have the two realities. The one when the patient advocacies are pushing research to do things, and we can name so many lysosomal storage disease. We can say and name many rare indications where the patient organization pushed and involved industry and insisted to do the research in the field, right? This is the different story, and they are really involved from the very beginning and really having the mouse models. And, you know, we have that great examples. And the second story, which is more frequent, I would say, is that when the Sanofi or other companies are developing, there is unusual to see involvement of patient advocates in the preclinical stage, right? And I get it, because it's not something that we are really expecting. We are saying that as early as possible, but in practice, what we see is later at the clinical stage, after phase 2, phase 3, when they need more patients, they are communicating with the patient advocacy groups, which is acceptable, but yeah, we can all improve our approach, right? So yeah, that's the thing. But thank you.
I absolutely agree. Does anyone want to respond, or maybe we can move to the next slide, which I will have then another few additional questions. So we will move again to the next Mentimeter. It's loading, so you should see it quite early. Okay.
But you are again not in presentation mode, Claudia?
Which is very strange.
No, now it's coming.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So what is the biggest barrier to meaningful patient involvement in clinical trial design? And here, please use one word. What do you think is the biggest barrier? No barrier? I think we see here quite a prominent word, which is knowledge. And let me just stop again sharing the screen. And I didn't expect anything else, but I would like to underline here from a patient representative point of view, I think it's not only knowledge in the patient organizations, it's not the knowledge by the patient, so patient education, but I think also, and I came from academia myself, I worked on early clinical gene therapy, so really preclinical basic research, also the knowledge from academia, clinicians on how to properly do patient engagement. So we all know it's still like this tick box. Yes, we have done it. We have done one survey. It is done. We have done patient engagement. So I think it's here really the first thing we see, collaboration. But I would like, and this was one of the questions also in the chat, to ask especially the clinicians first, so Julio and Antonia, and then also the developers or the industry, what they think is the main barrier currently to do patient engagement. And I would add to this question another one. What can we concretely do, or in practical terms do, to overcome this barrier? So maybe, Julio, I give you the floor first.
Yeah, I was the person who replied none. I can't find, I mean, I have them in front of me. So where's the barrier? I mean, of course, I could understand that for Sanofi or any drug company, there's a barriers in reaching the patients, but for us, academic, clinicians, what are the barriers? I mean, they're in front of us. We can ask them everything. We can discuss with them from the initial idea. I mean, we can, okay, I have this idea about developing this product. What do you think? Do you think you would go for this? Do you think you would like to take part in a clinical trial? So you see, for us, there are no barriers and there shouldn't be no barriers. And if there are barriers, we should ask ourselves why? Because I can't find a single barrier. They are at the other, I mean, depending on how your clinic is set up, they are in front of you or at your side, I don't know, but they are so close to us clinicians and nurses and all healthcare professionals that I'm afraid, I mean, I'm sorry, I mean, I can't find a barrier at all, for me at least.
I think that, and I saw a comment, I think from Gvantsa, we should all have clinicians like Julio, but for example, I found, and because I was interested in this science a while, not only since I joined EURORDIS, but even before, so because I did some kind of patient engagement, even without knowing it was patient engagement, to be honest. And I found a few articles also where they were asking young researchers and young clinicians what they think are the main barriers. And a few of them said that they are not educated enough to do it properly, and the time. So we know all they are on quite difficult timelines, under stress as we all are, but especially if they are young, maybe
you can find excuses if you want, of course. Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, whatever, language. But of course, I mean, I'm not talking about setting up a scientific advice, whatever, where you need the patients to speak English because it's going to be an international environment. That is difficult. That I understand. But for us as developers, I mean, you are going to speak the same language as the patient because they are in your country. So I honestly, I mean, if they are educated or not, it doesn't matter, because what you need, you're not developing the drug for the educated patients, the patients that are also professors. You are developing the products for all of them. So you need the opinion from all of them. You need to understand them all. So I guess, but I don't know. I was like that when I was younger, I have to say. I mean, I haven't been like this all my life. And I was the one who's thought, no, I know better what the patient needs. I don't need to ask him. I know what he needs. But of course, you know, you mature, and I guess you improve, at least in some aspects. In others, of course, you get worse, whatever.
Antonia, I think you would like to reply and share what do you think are the barriers?
Yeah, I mean, I get there are different levels of patient engagement. So for sure, you can talk to your patients when you see them in the clinics. You can discuss with them, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about this questionnaire? But if you really want to develop a clinical trial, then it takes a little bit more time and effort for the patients. They need to read some documents. They need to revise the patient information material and so on. And for me, or at least for our team, it was quite hard to find patient representatives that match to our clinical trials and that have also time and were able to revise our documents. So I guess we have still not enough patient representatives, and that was the reason why we started mentoring within the patient representatives group that we have here at Charité.
Thank you, Antonia. And maybe an additional question, and then I give the floor to Tara and Mary. Why do you think this is so? Why you don't why you don't have enough patient organizations?
It's not only patient organizations. It's really patients that are willing to put so much effort in the whole procedure of designing and conducting a clinical trial. Maybe it's also related to the disease entities. Maybe it's for some hematological neoplasms easier because you have more patients that survive longer, that are even cured. I don't know.
Yeah. I was thinking, due to my experience, I think one big, and another question comes to my mind because I think this discussion is very interesting. We are asking patients a lot. So we figure this out also within our associations. We are asking them to be on this board, on this trial, there, here, whatever. And as I think Gvantsa mentioned, they have a 24-hour, 7-day job. So they are patient caregivers, they have their own jobs. So we are asking them a lot. And this is something we would like. And I think there are, for example, in Canada, very nice guidelines that patients are reimbursed for their efforts. Yeah. I think this is something we should, because we are all project managers or whatever, we are paid for what we are doing. We are asking them to give a lot of their free time to do different things. And I think this is something we should become a standard. And maybe before I move on to the next question, Tara and Mary, what do you think are the barriers from a developer's industry point of view?
I can try to go first this time, sure. I in a way, I don't feel there can be, let's say, operational planning that are necessary, the resources. I agree with that, but I don't believe either that that's a barrier per se. And I think the one that we had come across, for rare disease with a different representation, we do want to speak to them together, so we hear kind of different perspectives, and so there is a well, maybe not necessary consensus, but actually understanding as a community, so not just individual interactions, and that may make it difficult for people who do not speak English, and that makes it more challenging. But there are also ways to try to overcome that. So it's not a, let's say, an absolute barrier either, but there can be some just operational challenges, which makes it more planning, more time necessary.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. Julio, I remember when I was on the patient advocacy side before I came, and I said, I can talk to anybody about anything at any time. And then you come to a pharmaceutical company where there are a lot more rules and regulations. And I think, oh, I miss those days. So, but we really do try to do our best. But especially, I would say, as a large company, there's a lot of stakeholders who are always trying to wrangle. But we do take, for example, community confidentiality very seriously. So if we do engage with members of the community, we have an agreement in place that outlines all of that, and data privacy, how we're going to store that, how we will compensate them in any scenario where we can. I know every country has different rules, but where we can, we do, and we have a kind of a market rate that is, we hope, fair but not influential, because you're always walking that line. You can't go too far in the other direction and look like you're trying to influence patients in any way. But so there is just the lead time of getting those types of agreements in place and scheduling. That's on the individual level. We do have a little bit more freedom and latitude when we're able to gather insights from advocacy group representatives who are kind of speaking more broadly for the community. But I would say what I've always found valuable too, being mindful of those barriers. Again, I'm calling out some things that are to keep in mind for patient advocacy groups, but many of them are already doing this and more. So definitely not implying that they're not out there moving mountains and kind of leading the charge in this space. But whenever there is input that they have collected that can be put out even in a white paper of a conversation around symptoms with patients, or there's so many ways that they can drive getting out some of those insights. So even if there are some barriers to that direct engagement, or it can be slow at times, all of that information, we are reading those reports, we are making insights, we're making decisions. So I think it's a little bit of both, but the spirit is here, and I think in many companies, but logistically, it's just, there are some steps that are required that can make it slow or make it difficult, especially when you're trying to find sometimes very specific individuals where you have a very strict criteria for some reason, and you're trying to make sure that's who you connect with. So there are some things that make it a little bit tougher for us, or a little bit slower, maybe is the way I should say it.
If I can just add a comment. So I was actually thinking of the word cloud previously, and the knowledge came out really large. And I was thinking whether that's more about knowledge about the opportunity that exists, in interacting with developers, or it's maybe feeling an intimidation about knowledge about the process of interactions. Yes, there are contractual things, or about the different phases of trial, and that might be feel intimidating. And so probably then these aspects, there are many things to do, and I'm also indeed many patient organizations are already doing a lot in providing this kind of resources and knowledge.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a great point, and I think to the degree that I can say it here on my own behalf, but I think those of us on this call can also filter it out to those that we know, is that we are not looking, in certain instances, there may be a scenario where a community member with a real sophisticated understanding of some element of drug development can give us very specific feedback, but often we're people who don't have a in-depth understanding of those things are exactly who we would love to hear from, because they are the people who are out there navigating the healthcare system, speaking in a certain way, who may be the ones who consider participation in a trial or use of a treatment if it makes it to market. So it is on us to adjust and communicate in a way that resonates with the community members. It is not, in my mind, on the community members to adjust to speak to us. And if we need someone with very specific background, we'll try to collaborate with the advocacy group. But I don't want anyone on this call, or the amazing patients and advocates outside of this, to feel that you now, on top of managing your disease or your loved one's disease, have to go out and learn everything about drug development. When we meet with community members, we often start off with here's what it looks like to, here are the phases, here are the pieces, so that they have that foundation. But please know that that's not on you. On top of everything else, conversations can still be so fruitful with whatever level of knowledge you bring, because we just want to understand you. We're really here to listen and learn and speak at the level that is right for you.
I think this was a very strong message, and I think it was also very nicely said, and probably the patient groups doesn't always see this in the same way, but I think this was very nicely said. And I also said that Julio said very well received, but I think this is very important when I also said the knowledge exchange in every part, in every stakeholder should know how to interact with the other stakeholder in a proper way. I would like to also ask another question, and I think Antonia, it was to you, Antonia, you mentioned about standardized patient engagement frameworks. Could you explain a little bit more, what do you think about it? And maybe we can also ask the other speakers what their thoughts are about standardization, and if this is something which could be implemented by the AMA or by the FDA, or should be implemented at the national authorities, or is something which could be really useful?
Yeah, so I think that there should be a framework, and maybe it's a good idea that this is developed by regulatory authorities, but that it can be modified by each center according to the needs, to the resources they have. And what I mean is, so you have to think about how to engage first with the patients, what information they need, what do you provide? Do you provide the lay abstract? Do you provide the whole synopsis? How do you discuss with the patients? How many meetings do you have? Do you prepare a questionnaire to them? Do you need specific questions about, do you think that the trial is feasible? What do you think about the numbers of visits, about the study procedure, and so on? This is what I mean with a structured framework.
So I would just add, if I could, there are a lot of resources so I think there's a couple different ways that you could come at a framework and who should be driving that and how much it should be standardized. But there are some consortia that have created. Transcelerate is one that comes to mind. Paladin. I know there's many others that have tried to build some of this structure. And I guess I would say to anyone listening who maybe wants to do this but isn't quite sure, there is no right way, if that makes you feel better. So the decision of how many meetings or something like that is really just a judgment call. But it's such a great point, because if you don't have that, if you've never been through the process before, it's really hard to figure out what that looks like. And even someone who's been working in the space for many years, I'm always adjusting and questioning. But there are resources out there with sample questions and potential pre-reads. So for those of us, for those on the call who are more researchers looking to do it but not sure exactly how to start, there's definitely information out there. But it's a very valid point, and it's not necessarily easy, and we're all really busy. So I'm not kind of oversimplifying what is required, but I would say there are some things out there. So please don't feel you're starting from nothing.
Thanks, Tara. Any additional comments to this, or let's move to the last Mentimeter and to the few. This one, we had it already. Can you? It's coming. So if you could change one thing to make ATMP clinical trials more patient-centered, what would it be in one word? It's a little bit the future outline. Share again, because I think it's sometimes when I share, the questions doesn't came up. I think we have quite different suggestions here, but what I especially like, I think, is the common goal, and I think also what was government involved, that as we mentioned before, maybe structured patient engagement would become a standard, and we really need here also funding to do this in a proper way. We need all the stakeholders committed to do this in a proper way. But I think this is a very interesting and also, let's say, start with the patients. I think I would say start with the patients and end with the patients. And I think when I had the first talk with Gvantsa made a very strong phrase about patient engagement. She said, always rely on us as patients because we will be the only ones who never give up. And I think this was a very strong commitment Gvantsa mentioned in the first meeting we had together.
Yeah.
Maybe you can
I had the same idea now. And it won't change.
And it won't change. But I think this is a very, very interesting and important message. And we all mentioned it should become something structured. So maybe just as we have only 5 minutes left, I will move to the next slides. If I can, I cannot. Let me see. And just to give you an overview of what our next outlines are and what we think to do with this webinar. So what's coming next? As I mentioned already, when we announced this webinar, we will run a second webinar by mid-June. So the date has still to be confirmed, but will be confirmed very soon. Probably lunchtime or late afternoon. I saw that a few people jumped out at some point, so maybe lunchtime is more feasible for main participants. And the idea is to, in the meantime, in these few months, to draft a roadmap informed by the insights from webinar 1 and from the Join4ATMP survey on how patient involvement should look like in ATMP clinical trial science. So a roadmap and some recommendations we need also to provide in the project. We will share this in advance with all the participants of the webinar and hope to have you all in this second webinar to go over this roadmap and recommendations together and again collect some feedback from all stakeholder groups, and then we can work together on a final recommendation through a really collaborative and co-creation report. And we will also share tomorrow a survey. What do you think about this first webinar? Because it's really important for us to have your evaluation and your feedback, to access the content, format, and relevance, to eventually identify gaps, and to inform also improvements for further activities. So please take these 2-3 minutes when you get our email tomorrow to respond to this survey. And just before closing, as we are all working in the ATMP field, I would just share a short information and a short, let's say, activity Erdera is currently doing. So we are collaborating with the University of Heidelberg in a rare disease prioritization framework for ATMPs. This will be a structured, expert-driven framework that identifies and ranks disease most feasible and suitable for ATMPs based on their needs, impact, and feasibility. How it works through the collaborations with the European reference networks. So currently only 2 of the ARNs have accepted, because it's quite, let's say, an intensive work, because you could imagine how many diseases they will go through and rank it. So we are currently working with ERCnet, with the European reference for complex diseases, and with ARN liver. And they will launch an open call to involve patient representatives, clinicians, academics to evaluate specific disease group where they are most knowledgeable in it. So if you want to have a little bit more about this information, but this is you could contact Carol from the University of Heidelberg. You see her email here, but I think please stay tuned. This is something which will go through the ARNs in the next 2-3 months, because the idea is to have this prioritization framework ready by the summer. So please stay tuned. We will publish it also on the EURORDIS website and on all relevant information. But this is something where surely different stakeholders can contribute and make a great. And this was my last slide. So thank you all for your attention. It was lovely to have you with us. Thank you again to the amazing speakers. I think we had some very nice insights. And for everything, please feel free to reach out. We will share the recordings very soon on the Join4ATMP website and then the EURORDIS website. And have all a lovely evening. Thank you.